the single best thing you can do, I think, and have a big impact on your academic results, is massively increase the amount of physical activity in a school. Preparing for an exam, in the last 10 minutes, the absolute best thing you can do is do 10 minutes of vigorous activity. If you're the least fit, on average, you're in the 26th, 28th percentile. If you're the most fit, you're in the 60th to 66th percentile. To put that in context, the difference in GCSE grades is between a C/D grade and an A grade. And this is borne out in studies. Here's an unfit child. Here's a fit child. That's 40% faster brain. BMI and aerobic fitness were the best predictors of academic results, but not just that, life satisfaction and socioeconomic standing. They also found that fitness was more closely correlated to IQ than genes or family background. Fit people earn more than unfit people. Quite a lot more, actually. Inactivity kills as many people as smoking across Europe. Building resilience, strengthening your mental well-being, and reducing stress and anxiety. So before we start, I'd just like to, I think we already stretch a bit, and there's a good reason for this. I'd like to stand up. And if you can see me, we're going to just give yourselves a bit of space. But
no backflips.
If you can do it, we're going to do 10 Hindu squats.
No backflips from you.
I want to hear some noise. A Hindu squat, for those that can't see, I feel like I'm going to have to stand up here, aren't I? Hindu squat is like this. Yeah, it's a Hindu squat. And I want us to do 10 of them, hard and relatively fast. And you can make some noise, yeah? And if you can't do that specifically,
I'm going to go over here.
Then do something different that is energizing and is getting your heart rate up. So are we ready? Sorry, are we ready?
Of course we are, Michael.
Good. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, keep going, 7, 8, harder, 9, 10, and 1 for luck.
I knew he was going to do that. He's got good.
Good. So there's a good reason why I've done that. That's what's just happened to your brain. You've just got it flowing with a lot more blood, and your brain has been activated. If you're preparing for an exam, in the last 10 minutes, the absolute best thing you can do is do 10 minutes of vigorous activity. Forget the last minute revision that goes on in all schools, universities. Actually, 10 minutes of exercise is what would really make a difference. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about how that is and why that is. But first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Kevin for inviting me to talk on my topic I'm really passionate about. And also to say how excited I am to be in a group of people who are actually responsible for bringing up our next generation of kids. It's an amazing job and a wonderful thing you're doing. And I'm just really excited that I can just be part of that, because you guys are the coalface. Moments of truth happen with you, and all we can do around you is just help you give some tools. So thank you as well for having me here to speak to you. Good. If you need any evidence, this is it. This is a graph that shows the academic results compared to physical fitness in a study of 116,000 Californian students, and it's actually years 5, 7, and 9, but this one is years 9, I think. And on the left-hand side is the least fit. On the right-hand side is the most fit. Up here is your percentile. So what proportion, where do you fit in the total? So if you're the top person, you get 100%, 100th percentile. If you're the lowest, you get 0. They are averages. However, numeracy and literacy, if you're the least fit, on average, you're in the 26th, 28th percentile. If you're the most fit, you're in the 60th to 66th percentile. To put that in context, the difference in GCSE grades is between a C/D grade and an A grade. Yep. Now this is correlational, I understand that, but I'm going to give you some of the science behind why there's also some causation going on as well. Yep. So that, if ever you've got an argument with your head teacher, or if you are a head teacher, if you're thinking about this, then just show them this. This is what it's about. Physically, if you're fitter, you actually are going to perform better. And there's some good evolutionary reasons for that. Just a quick bit about us. Sports for schools. We bring Olympic athletes into schools. That's Joe Jackson, 3 times Olympic competitor and a bronze medalist. We visit 1,200 schools a year, and I go into about sort of 20 or 30. 320,000 kids a year, and we run fitness circuits that inspire kids and teachers into doing physical activity. And the athlete gives a talk. They don't cost the school anything. The second thing we do is we have started a platform which is free for schools to use to connect schools to coaches, specialist coaches who are experienced, and it makes your life unbelievably easy as it runs the whole process. So it's a platform that gets rid of, in fact, there's some flyers in there actually. We say 15 clubs in 30 minutes of admin. And the last thing we do is what I'm doing now, actually top right-hand corner, is Get Active. The athletes we work with are really passionate about some of these subjects, and so we start developing programs which they deliver in schools to help communicate. And they do it well because they're passionate, but also because it's an Olympic athlete, you get impact. And that all leads into some of the topics we're going to talk about in a second. Just in case you're thinking that physical activity is important, think about inactivity. Inactivity kills as many people as smoking across Europe. In this country, that's about 100,000 people die early because of inactivity. That's a huge number. And for adults, that can be avoided with just a little bit of physical activity during the week. So it is massive. And we're dealing with kids. You may know some of these stats. If you don't, here they are. About 80% of kids don't do enough physical activity. Yep. Particularly girls, as it happens. The World Health Organization says at least an hour of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. And just in case you're not yet worried, those numbers are down over 5 years from 28% to 19%. It's actually dropping rapidly. So we have a problem. I'd just like to remind everybody, it is virtually impossible to do too much physical activity. It's not an addiction problem. There have been hardly any recorded instances of somebody getting addicted to physical activity. And if they do, actually it's a good thing. Yeah? Happy, happy addiction. So what I'm really here to talk to you about is a brain. That's a brain. The story of the brain in our evolution is that it started down here in the cerebellum, which has about half the nerve cells. It coordinates movement, thought, and actually pretty much everything else in reality, and is used by the rest of the brain a lot because it's so fast and it's got so many neurons in it. The hippocampus is in the middle, and that's the instinct side. So that's stuff which takes place without you even thinking about it, your heartbeat. It's also learned responses, they then get programmed in to the hippocampus. The front is the bit we've developed most recently as a human species, and that's the strategy, that's the thinking part, which makes us quite unique in the animal kingdom. A memory. A memory is a connection between neurons. Yep. And what happens is, as I'm doing here, your brains are connecting new neurons together. And one of the big things that somebody got a Nobel Prize for in the last 10 years was the discovery that brains grow. There was a belief that once you hit teenager years or late teenage years, that was it. Your brain wasn't going to grow. Wrong. The big discovery is the brain is plastic. It grows, it develops all the time. And a memory is just a connection between two neurons. Now, if the memory is repeated, what you end up with is a stronger connection. And if it's intense, it also becomes stronger. So memory strength, which is what we're trying to do as teachers, whether we're physical teachers or IQ teachers or EQ teachers, whatever we're bringing our children up to do, is a function of frequency and intensity to the power of n. Good example, any of you walk here today and have a lion jump out at you? Probably not, but if it had happened, I guarantee you to remember that for the rest of your life. One instance, one line, you're going to remember it, right? Yeah. So intensity is very important. And in today's society, we disdain intensity. Want to be safe, don't want to fall, don't want to hurt yourself, don't want to do all these things. So we're losing that essential ingredient in creating good memories, in creating memories that form us. Intensity is really important. It can be painful, but it forms memories, which are who we are. It's not the heart, actually, it's the brain, interestingly. There's one chemical I'm just going to talk to you about today briefly, and that's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Factors are things that help cells grow. This is all studies which have been proven, peer-reviewed. If you take a standard brain, let's, for argument's sake, a standard brain, you do physical activity produces BDNF. Call it sort of the miracle grow of your body, miracle chemical of your body. If you get a bit of BDNF, miracle grow, and put it on some neurons in a petri dish, they grow. You end up growing, sprouting new neurons and new axons and new dendrites. And they've shown this. More physical activity, bigger brain, but also, I'll show you later, faster brain. And it's particularly in the cerebellum and hippocampus that the BDNF acts. So it really speeds things up. So what happens is, BDNF, a new neuron. The neuron is looking to connect somewhere, right? New neurons wanting to connect, create new memories, speed up your brain, create resilience, EQ, IQ, and PQ. Here's a great study in Germany. It's actually done with older people, but it applies to younger people as well. A typical way of figuring out how fast your brain is working is to think about how quickly you can learn vocab. Just a standard test they do. So before doing some physical activity and then after, what they found is just 20 minutes on a treadmill and their brains are working 20% faster. Now as a one-off, that does decline over time. But think of it as a spinning wheel. What's it called? Momentum. You know, you're spinning a wheel, getting it going faster and faster and faster. If you just do a little bit, it spins and it dies. But if you keep on doing it, pumping it up, it keeps the same benefits. And 20% is really important. And I'm going to just divert a bit into maths. If there's any maths teachers here, you'll know this, or just sit quietly. Our brains are very bad at thinking about compound growth. We think linearly. So 0.2 growth each year, let's say, ends up on a straight line. 20% compounds. And over time, let's say 10 years, you're talking about twice the difference compared to just a steady growth. Yeah? So physical activity moves you from that straight line up. And it creates this molecular memory around BDNF. And this is borne out in studies. Here's an unfit child going through years 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that on the left-hand side is brain processing speed. Here's a fit child. That's 40% faster brain. Yeah? And I'll show you actually in the next session, I'm doing a workshop about what that can mean and how you can use that in the school day. Because actually a 40% improved faster brain means you can get through your 5 hours of work of studies in about 3.5, 3.25. Yeah? So actually that'd be quite helpful, wouldn't it? You know, we'd all like to knock off work early, wouldn't we? Right? Very briefly, there's other things which really help the brain develop. So, what they found, here's a really interesting study. A group of people running, going jogging. Put up your hand if you went running today or did some exercise this morning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. I'm sure all of you will rectify that by the end of today, after this. But a good study, jogging through town for 20 minutes, actually it's 35 minutes, and jogging through a forest. Well, the brain processing speed of the person jogging through the forest was 20% faster, funny, 20% keeps coming up, doesn't it, than the one jogging through town. Yeah? So the brain was being stimulated by this environment. Just think about a tree. Your brain is tracking all those leaves. It's learning, it's looking. A town is very straight and boring in reality to the brain. Yeah? So a run in the forest is a whole lot better than a run in town. Football's good compared to a run. Run is fantastic. Go for a run. But if you want to improve it, it adds another dimension. There's another dimension which is watching the other person, playing the ball. Your brain is firing. It's really firing. It's loving it. And that's why the reward center starts kicking in and you get satisfaction from it. Running alone, running with a friend. A friend is going to have a conversation. That's an extra load, an extra stress on your brain. Good thing. Gym, dancing. Dancing's fabulous. It's a brilliant thing for the brain, particularly if you get your heart rate up during the dance occasionally. And there's another study actually around random music versus constant music, steady music, that shows your brain works faster in random music. It's trying to cope with all these changes. Yeah? Doubles tennis to singles tennis. More aerobic. And of course you're doing it socially, meeting up afterwards. Fantastic. Yeah? So those are all useful when you're designing exercises and thinking about getting kids engaged. And of course, the Chief Medical Officer is very clear about what we need to do as children, and as adults supervising children. 60 minutes a day is the minimum. There is a real danger with minimums. Minimum standards have been shown to lower overall standards. So actually, I'll be talking about that separately, about how you actually want to go for best practice, not minimum standards. Vigorous intensity activities at least 3 times a week. Just minimize the amount of time sedentary. I was talking to a school recently, and their maths, it's a secondary school, actually it's a sixth form college, their maths classrooms now are white walls, no tables, no chairs, and they stand on the white walls and do their stuff. And then they photograph it. So they're actually moving throughout. So the brain is loving it. More physical movement, more just a little bit heart rate up. It's superb. And just to frighten you again, the least fit 10-year-old English from an English child in a class of 30 in 98 would be one of the 5 fittest a couple of years ago. That is really frightening, isn't it? Really frightening. So I've talked a bit about physical activity and academic results and the brain. And that's because I understand most in this room will be teachers, will be in schools. Yep. The single best thing you can do, I think, and have a big impact on academic results is massively increase the amount of physical activity in a school. But it's also about building resilience, strengthening your mental well-being, and reducing stress and anxiety, which are becoming more and more common amongst the younger generation, which has never been seen before. You know, by nature, kids don't do that. You know, but in the last 50, 100 years, we've been seeing that a lot more. Okay, back to the brain. This is essentially a neuron. It's made up of a few things. Here's the cell. There's dendrites, which are reaching out. There's an axon. And there's an axon ending looking to connect to another dendrite. You know, I said that when you create a memory, if you do it repetitively, what you're doing is you're actually strengthening this axon, increasing the strength of the sheath and growing it so it flows faster, yeah, and it becomes more permanent. Intensity does the same. So this dendrite is looking to connect to another one, and memories speed that up through chemicals called neurotransmitters. They connect in a synapse. Yeah? And neurotransmitters are things which help you connect your synapses. So you're looking for that spark that is connecting things to the brain. And this is happening right now for all of you. Things are going on in your brain, and your synapses, synapses are firing. cortisol is a chemical. It's a it's not a hormone. And this is a really interesting chemical because we all need a bit of it. It prepares the brain. It mobilizes the fuel in your body and gets you ready to do stuff. So you've all got a bit of cortisol now. You're ready to learn. You're thinking. But too much is toxic. This is one of the sort of anxiety, depression issues. And chronic stress actually really has a bad effect. So if you've got children that are really stressed or bullied or in a situation where they're struggling, they've probably got too much cortisol. And it erodes the connections between the neurons. So all that good work gets broken down and goes into reverse. Yeah? But guess what? Exercise counters this effect. Yeah? Exercise produces BDNF. BDNF puts more receptors in the brain, so there can be more connections, more receptors for the neurotransmitters to connect to. It puts more blood, better blood supply, and it helps the rational brain overcome the instinct brain, which is what you're trying to do in a lot of mental illnesses. Reprogram the brain with new connections. 2 neurotransmitters worth mentioning, which you've probably heard about. People talk about them a lot. Dopamine. So dopamine is important in movement, attention, cognition. The dopamine in our brains right now. Motivation, pleasure. Yeah, we think about dopamine as a pleasure neurotransmitter. Also addiction, of course. Exercise immediately increases dopamine. So you just got a whole load of dopamine earlier. Hopefully you're feeling good. It's not as good as sex, but it's a good start. Serotonin, another one. Technically, if you're happy, it's these two. This is the technical side of being happy. Serotonin is a bit more about mood, anxiousness, impulsivity, self-esteem. It's kind of the policeman of the brain. It's controlling what's going on. Yeah, you want a bit, it's managing the whole process. Again, exercise immediately increases serotonin in the brain. And last one is a human growth hormone. This is the kind of the master hormone that helps you grow. Lots of it in children, and it declines as we get older. So by my age, I'm just turned 50, I've got about 1/10 of the amount of this hormone in my body that maybe a 10 or a 15-year-old might have. Yeah? But the more exercise I do, the better it is. It massively increases HGH and boosts. And human growth hormone is vital in producing BDNF, the miracle growth. Yeah? So all these things are coming together, and scientists are discovering all these things right now that are underpinning what actually our grandparents knew, which is if you're in a bad mood, just go outside for a walk. Go and do some exercise. Exercise is good. I was going to start with a quote from Socrates, who says exactly that. Thousands of years we've known exercise is good. So studies bear this out. This is a great study. They got a group of people and put them who are quite severely depressed and put them on antidepressants, another group on an exercise regime, and another one on both. So I think you're probably thinking what I thought when I first saw this, which is I bet you both is best. 16 weeks later, all 3 had about a 50% drop in depression. Yeah, so that was pretty good. Tick in the box. Yep. And what happens is that antidepressants work on those synapses and do a lot of the jobs which physical activity does. They produce a lot of the chemicals that physical activity produces, or they work in the same way. So after 6 months, though, they came back and had a look. 38% had relapsed, 31% of the both, and only 8% of those on exercise. So the success rate of physical activity was way better than the other ones, and that's borne out. If you go and speak to GPs who are up on this, they will tell you the #1 prescription now for depression or anxiety or mental illness is physical activity. Yeah. So people here, you might have some people who are responsible for well-being and safeguarding in schools. Physical activity.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Now how do you apply that in that case to a special education each scenario where there may be physical limitations.
So it is very hard, and that is absolutely true. However, if you can, it's actually about heart rate. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. The main thing is, heart rate is what matters. Actually, I think it's in my second session. So I'll talk about it now briefly. Think about somebody who is overweight and is struggling to do a press-up or run anywhere versus a fit child that does top team football, sport, and everything, right? Actually, the effort is what you want to be looking at, and heart rate is effort. Heart rate is what you want to do, is get your heart rate up. And my father was actually also in a wheelchair, and he was disabled. He had muscular dystrophy, and just a small amount could get his heart rate up. And actually, that's what you want to try and do, is just get a bit of heart rate up and movement. And that has a big effect. And eventually, the reward center in the brain kicks in and starts feeling good about it. So even if you are unfit, you'll start feeling those sentiments. Yeah. And so heart rate. If I had 100 million quid, I would buy every school a heart rate monitor for every child in every school. Because once you start measuring stuff, it's amazing what you start doing. And the kids at the playground, can you imagine that? They'd be around there looking at their heart rates. Job done. You know, fantastic. Heart rate monitors. And there's some schools in actually some good case studies where they have had heart rate monitors and started using them, and it had exactly that effect. They're very cheap. Okay, so mental illness. So other things, anxiety. So I'm one of these people who's very heavily bullied at school. I was miserable, and I'm very sporty, but I didn't become sporty at school because I didn't have the confidence, and I had anxiety. Anxiety, so physical activity, it distracts. It distracts the brain from that cycle of anxiety. Yeah? And it's longer lasting. We saw that with the drugs. It gets that spinning wheel going. Yeah? The flywheel. It reduces muscle tension. So physical activity produces chemicals in the body which reduces muscle tension. It also clears out all the bad stuff. So we all talk about in wine, there's the free radicals, which help clean the body up. Well, actually, exercise does it many times better. And actually, just ingesting it doesn't mean it's going to be that when it gets into your body. It'll probably get changed into something else in your stomach, and it'll be of no use whatsoever. But the body has a natural mechanism, which is to produce those chemicals inside itself in the right place at the right time. It builds the brain, we've discussed that. And it builds it in a balanced way. Chemicals can be very targeted, but the body balances everything. It teaches a different outcome. Think about those neurons, those connections in the brain. Yeah? A different connection is happening. You're strengthening different pathways, and the other ones will become less important. So it reroutes the brain circuits. It improves resilience, because the body learns from periods without anxiety that actually it's okay. I'm going to survive. There's hope at the end of the tunnel. Hope is the most important thing here. Is there hope? Yeah? So the body physiologically is learning that, it's okay. I'm going to be all right. Anxiety immobilizes. Fight and flight. If you've got anxiety, you're more likely to do it like this and stop, because that's safe. And actually, physical activity sets you free. It gets rid of that sort of fight and flight. Animals do that occasionally. They stop. Hedgehogs being attacked, right? It's one of their defense mechanisms. I'm going to talk a bit about ADHD. So I have ADHD. A study in the States suggests about 4% of children have ADHD. It is a neurological disorder. It's something in the brain. And it's very little understood, I found in this country visiting schools. It is something in the brain which is a neurological disorder in the programming of the brain, those connections. And it is usually genetically transmitted. If you're a twin with ADHD, there's a 91% chance that the other twins got it as well. Yeah? And it is the brain seeking stimulation. At a steady state, all of us, our brains are providing a certain level of stimulation. The chemicals are providing enough stimulation, and the wiring is such that you're getting enough stimulation to be content. An ADHD person is missing some of that. And what it's doing is it's desperately trying to get back up to that steady, comfortable state. So my daughter has a bit ADHD. She listens to hard rock music when she's studying. It works. It's amazing. She listens to that and she calms down and she can focus. Or some people doodle. If you've got ADHD, a child that's got ADHD, let them get up and walk around. It just allows that stimulation. The brain is being stimulated just by walking. Stuff's happening. The solution, of course, is to have a stimulant, so chemicals, right? Amphetamines. This is how they discovered about ADHD. In 1937, in those days, they used to put people with ADHD into a big hospital, put them aside, make them safe, fence them off, walls and so on. And one day, a doctor in New York, upstate New York, in one of these places with about 80 kids, said, we're just going to try amphetamines. For the first time ever, they were all able to study. They all sat down and suddenly they were able to concentrate because it's increasing the stimulation of the brain. Ritalin is the most commonly prescribed. It's actually just a standard amphetamine. But of course, exercise stimulates the brain. I think you're getting that message. And just beware, if you're a high IQ person, then you have a lot of ability to cope and have coping strategies for your ADHD. Because you can get stimulated in different ways. But it doesn't mean you haven't got the same problem. What happens later in life is you tend to get more anxiety as a result because your brain is getting knackered at having to cope with this stuff. So a lot of school, if you've got a child that's occasionally pushing the boundaries, but actually is basically okay and quite bright, but occasionally is pushing the boundaries and getting bored, there's a good chance they're ADHD, especially if they love exercise, where they're firing and they're super active, social. It's actually a gift, ADHD. It's a distraction. Your brain needs distraction, which actually is the other side of creativity. Yeah, impulsiveness, creativity. Life would be very boring without ADHD people. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this really interesting study. In Sweden, they had national service until 2011. They brought it back in 2016, so they're worried about the Russians. But the great thing about it was they had great data. This is 15 and 18-year-old boys. So it's restricted, but there were 1.2 million of them. And what they found was BMI and aerobic fitness were the best predictors of academic results, but not just that, life satisfaction and socioeconomic standing. Yeah. They also found that fitness was more closely correlated to IQ than genes or family background. Yeah. So we all think, actually, that kids that are struggling in deprived communities, we're trying to give them hope, and we give them school, and we give them all support, but we should also make sure they're fit, because that is the best predictor, according to this study, of whether they're going to be successful later in life. By success, I mean happy, doing steady, happy lives, not just the financial side, there's a whole package there. Financial side is interesting. Fit people earn more than unfit people. Quite a lot more, actually. Okay, the last thing is basics. People talk about moderate and vigorous physical activity. Just in case you don't know, what we're looking at is that moderate activity, you're feeling warmer, your heart rate's increasing, probably 60%-ish, 65% of your supposed maximum. But you can probably keep a conversation going just as you're doing that activity. Vigorous is your short breath, rapid heart rate, can't carry on a conversation. So if you're designing programs in schools, you've got to get up to that vigorous. Even if it's just for 2 or 3 minutes and you do high intensity interval training, which I'll talk about later, that's what you want to aim for. It's not just standing up and going for a walk. And the daily mile is fantastic, but see if you do it in the daily mile, you can just get in a quick couple of minutes of sprinting as you do it. Okay, well, thank you. This is our mission. We're a social enterprise. Our mission is for physical activity to be as important as numeracy and literacy in schools, and be put on a par with it. I'm doing another session later, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how if you reduce the number of hours of school lessons and put physical activity in, you're actually going to get a better overall outcome, and a few other things around that. So it's going to be a practical session on case studies and so on. If you want to talk, or you just want a copy of the slide deck and 2 other great reports I've got, which I think just summarize a lot of this and gives you lots of ideas, send me an email. I've put my cards on there. And before we finish, you might notice you might all have a pedometer. Good. So, I'm just going to very quickly explain. I'm afraid they're a bit cheap, so they might reset occasionally. But if you reset them now, there's going to be a little competition. And beware, they will go blank occasionally. That's just because they're sleeping. They're still counting. You can't get away. I would put them somewhere where you're not going to knock it. And do check occasionally how many steps you've done, because if you knock it a bit in the wrong way, it will accidentally reset. So it's a fun competition. We just play it honestly. If you've reset, just guess how many you've got. Send me an email, or send an email to steps@sportsforschools.org. And the person who's got the most will send an Olympic athlete to do a bit of fun with you in your school, or where it happens to be, in a school, and inspire some of your kids. Yeah. End of the day, send me an email, and we'll see who gets the athletes come visit you. Good. Thank you.